Hello everyone, my name is Andrew and today we're going to continue working with PyAssimilator. In that video, I'm going to show you repository pattern and it's going to allow us to save data, filter data, read data, update or delete data. So basically manage our information, manage our data. And we're going to work with internal repository. So that means that all of the things that we're going to save, read, update are going to be saved in a Python dictionary. I'm just going to write dict. And we're also going to work with users. So I'm going to create a basic user management system in that video. The first thing that we're going to do is create a file called models.py. That file is going to contain all of our models. And since we work with the internal repository, so once again, that means that all of the things that we're going to save are saved in Python dictionaries. What we're going to do is import a specific type of model. So from assimilator.core.database, I'm going to import a thing called base model. Core module inside of Assimilator contains all of the abstract patterns that you're going to use. And the base model, if we go to Assimilator, is just a basic pydantic model with some additions. Like we have an ID. ID is a unique identifier that allows you to distinguish one model from another. We also have Assimilator config. We're not going to talk about it right now, but it has cool things like ID auto-generation or exclusion of different parameters from our savings. Like when we want to save from database, we want to exclude different parameters from our model. We're not going to talk about it for now, but that model and all the other models are going to help you in the future. But basically, base model is a basic pydantic model with some additions. That's it. And if you have never worked with pydantic, then there are millions of tutorials on how that library works. I'm going to write it here, pydantic. Okay, so what we're going to do is create our first model, which I'm going to call just user. It's going to inherit from base model, and what we're going to have is username, email, and let's say our balance, which is going to be a float and defaults to 0. So we don't really need to create our ID once again, because ID is created inside of our base model. And ID is auto-generated, so you don't really need to provide it either. You just create your model and you provide your username, email, and balance. Okay, now what we do? Now we go back to main.py to create our internal repository. Or do we? Let's say that in that video, I'm going to show you create user and read user. So we're going to create our user and read it. But the thing is that we don't want to create our patterns inside of here. I don't want to create my internal repository inside of here. Why is that? Because we want to use dependency injection to change our patterns to substitute them in the future. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a file called dependencies. I think that's correct, dependencies.py. And here I'm going to create a function called create repository. And that function is going to return my repository. I'm going to import it from Assimilator core database, and the repository is the abstract class for the repository. Once again, I'm going to repeat it. Repository is a pattern, it's an object, a class that allows you to work with your data. Any kind of data management is going to happen in the repository. That's it. And create repository is a function that's going to create that repository. And as you can see, I said that we're going to create internal repository. It means that all of the data that we're going to use is saved inside of Python dictionaries. But the thing is that here I say that my create repository returns a base repository. So my core database repository, my abstract class. If we go here, we can see that that class is indeed abstract. The thing is that we want that function to return abstract repository in order to follow sorted. If we want to be specific, we want to follow dependency inversion, something like that. So basically, we don't want to return internal repository here because we want to substitute that pattern for other patterns like a Redis repository, Alchemy repository, or any other repository in the future. Let's create our return internal repository like that. And internal repository accepts two things that we really need. It requires two things. First of all, session and then model. So what is a session? Session is a dictionary and model is the model that we created, user. Session is your database. You're going to save all the things in that specific session. And model is the model that you're going to work with. In our case, it's a user. There are lots of things to discuss about how we should create our models and how we should create our repositories, but that's in the future. For now, just create this. Session is a dictionary and the model is a user. Here's the thing though. If we want to save everything in one dictionary, so if we want to create two repositories, and that function is going to be called every time we need a new repository. So every time we need a new data management object, we're going to work with the create repository, or the repository that is returned from create repository. But if we use session as a dictionary like that, then every time we create a repository, we're going to have a new dictionary object. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put database here as a dictionary and then provide it like this. So a global object database. That's just fine. So every time we create a new internal repository, it's going to be the same dictionary that is changed and read. Okay, so create repository is the function that we're going to use in our main.py. Once again, it just returns an internal repository with our model and session. So let's use our create user, and what I'm going to do here is accept repository as a parameter, like that. And then if our name is main, so if we run that specific file, what we're going to do is create our user. And let's use create user with create repository inside of there. So repository is our create repository. Once again, what do we do? Inside of that main.py file, and that's our basic logic, that our main file, we use create user function and we provide our repository as an argument. So create repository is a function that is called, and the repository is provided as an argument. And here inside of my create user, what do? Is I just use my repository provided. So repository, let's say .save, because we want to create our user, and save function in repository allows you to save your models, save your entities. And inside of save, what we can just do is provide our user like that. Let's import it from models. Okay, here's our user. What do we need to do with that user? We need username and email. Balance is going to be 0 by default. So username is going to be Andrei, and email is going to be my email, like that. Okay, let me make the code a little bit cleaner, and I think that's it. So our new user is going to be created here. For now, it's just a Pydantic model. And if you want to save that user, what do is you just provide that user inside of your repository. That's it. That's how your user is going to be saved. Let's run our code, and well, everything works. And after that repository save, what I can do is print that repository session. And we're going to see that our session contains our user inside of it. And as you can see, what we have here is that our user, so that's our session, right? Here's our session. It's a dictionary that we provided in dependencies.py. It's basically our database. We have our ID as our key. As you can see, ID here inside of that user and ID here as a dictionary key are the same. Then we have username, email, and balance as 0. So we saved that entity, that Pydantic model, well, base model, but it's basically a Pydantic model inside of our repository by just creating that model here and using repository.save from our new user. You don't really want to work with sessions like that, so you don't really want to show your session to your logic, because it can bring a lot of havoc in the future. But you can do it just to read the session, if you can, of course, because let's say in SQL Alchemy, your session is just a connection to the database. So you're not going to be able to see anything if you work with SQL Alchemy, but you're going to see a lot of things if you work with internal repositories and Python dictionaries. So we saved our user here. Now let's go to read user, and let's read our user from there. So I'm going to call a function read user. It's going to accept my repository as well. And what we're going to do here is repository.get. So get function is a function that returns one entity, any entity. In our case, we want to get one user. We also have a function called filter, but that function is for a lot of entities altogether. So if, let's say, you want to filter all the adults in your database, so you can say age is greater than 18, then you're using repository.filter. And what we're going to do here is, user is repository.get, but of course we need to provide some filters in here. And all the filters that we're going to provide are called specification. So what is a specification? When we want to filter our entity, and once again, repository.get gets your entity from the database, what you want to do is you want to use specifications. So specification gets your query, gets your gets the thing that you want to filter, and then it shortens the results. So it can apply some filters, joins, pagination, whatever you want. In our case, what we want to do is we want to find our user with the username Andrei. So let's say that we want to filter our user by its username. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do the following. Repository, specs, so you can use specifications or specs. Specs is just a shorter version. .filter. And what does it do? That is a filter specification. It allows us to pass some filters, some entity filters, some database filters to shorten the results. In our case, what's our filter? Our filter is that username should be Andre. I'm just going to put it here, and that's it. That's how it works. Now, what we can do is we can print our user, and of course, well, we need to provide our repository here. So what I'm going to do is create my repository once again. As you can see, in read user and create repository, we create two separate repositories. Let's run it, and we're going to see that the user created right here is the user that, well, the user that is printed is the user that we created in create user. So what did we do here? We created our user with repository.save, and then we read our user with repository.get. And repository.specs filter allowed us to shorten the results and only get the user that has username as Andre. If we remove those filters, then we're going to see, well, we're going to see that user because it's the only one in the database. But let's say that we have two users. So I'm going to save the same user twice. Actually, yeah, we're going to have the same user because it has the same ID. But let's say that we want to create a separate user. So user 1 and then user 2. So user 2 is Andre 2 and the email is going to be the same. New user 2, we're going to run that code and okay, yeah, we don't see any other result because yeah, we have our specification here. So as you can see, specification really filters that thing. So we only have username with Andre. If I put Andre 2, I can see that the new user is Andre 2. But if I remove my specification, then I'm going to see an error called data layer error. And that error basically says that we have multiple results error. Get should only return one result. Issue multiple results in your repository, then use filter. And if I use filter, it's going to be users, because I return multiple users. So let's do it like that. And you're going to see that we have a list of users. So the first user is Andre, the second user is Andre 2. We can also use specifications in filter. So we can do repository specs filter, where let's say email is my email, like that. And we're going to see two users once again. And we can also use other things like combine filters. We can use email is this and balance is 0. Of course, we're going to see the same result, but if I change my second user balance to, let's say, 100, then it's going to be different. So you can use different filters with specifications. You can query your data differently with filter or get, and let me just return everything to the state that it was in before. So we only have one user, and we only use repository get. This user, second user, is going to be deleted, and it was deleted right here. Again, what did we do today is we created our repository, we saved our user inside of create user and read user, and we use specifications in order to filter our users using different criteria. That's it. That's how it works. What I want to add is that it's always better to query your users by their ID. In any kind of provider, it's always better to query by ID. But we don't always know the ID of the user, so we can use emails or any other filters of our liking. That's it. That's everything that I want to tell you today. You can look at that code in the description in the GitHub. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye.